I don't need insurance, or do I? It's that time of the year when the insurance on the instruments becomes due. Well, actually, the insurance becomes due in early February, if I'm brutally honest, but my insurance company is obviously very well automated, so that the quote arrived today, yes, Sunday. But remember, computers don't take the weekend off, and they don't have to have 2 days to recover for New Year. So, being a bit bored this morning, I sat there while I was eating my breakfast looking for potentially better deals. And astonishingly, I wasn't surprised to find that I actually couldn't get a much better deal than the deal that the insurance company is currently giving me. This is kind of niche insurance for musical instruments. So there's not very many players in the market, and they all tend to sort of have very similar offerings. But be careful when you're looking at this sort of stuff, because one company that quoted me £50,000 worth of cover. Now, I don't need £50,000 worth of cover, but they quoted me £50,000 worth of cover. But no one item could be valued at more than £1,000. And if you think I've got a Kronos, my Kronos even second hand is more than £1,000. That doesn't work very well. Another company quoted me £25,000, but they had an individual item limit of £2,500. My particular company that I have at the moment is I can't remember how much it is now, but I think it's £30,000, which is more than I actually need. But I only have to individually itemise instruments that are valued at more than £2,000. So I can have 30,000 in total, but I can have, if I have instruments that are over £2,000, then I have to specifically name those particular instruments. But all the rest of them effectively live in the pool, if you like. But what I thought I would do with this video is I would sort of say, go through a couple of the sort of reasons why you might need insurance and what you're actually insuring. Now, that sounds a bit daft, but the reason I say that is because you need to understand what you're insuring, where you're insuring it, and what risks you're insuring it against. Okay, so hopefully that sort of clears that up. It probably doesn't clear it up whatsoever, if I'm brutally honest. But the list of risks and what you're insuring, etc., can be quite lengthy. This is not home contents insurance. And before you start shouting at the screen, oh, my stuff is covered on your home contents insurance, what I would say, and I've got friends who have fallen foul of this, is read the small print. Household insurance is really designed to cover household items, and they have extensions to the insurance typically to cover high value electronic equipment like your TVs and your DVD players, and your jewellery and watches and your bicycles and all that sort of stuff. And they typically have to be they're extensions to the insurance policy, in terms of the insurance policy extends its cover to those particular risks. But it doesn't tend to cover musical instruments, because unless they're explicitly specified. And if you use your musical instrument to generate an income, and as soon as I've started doing this, the fly, this is December, where'd the fly come from? But as soon as you start using a musical instrument to earn a living from, then you tend to find that becomes exempt from the insurance. There's normally some sort of exemption clause about things that you use in your work day. It's the reason why companies, when you have your company laptop, for argument's sake, it's the company's responsibility to insure it on your home contents insurance, not yours. Remember that it's not your responsibility to insure your company's laptop if it gets stolen from your house. Anyway, let's get on with looking at what needs to be insured. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram, and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. You're probably going to say, why do I need to work out what's going to be insured? Surely it's my things, my keyboards, my drum machines, you know. But before you go onto one of these websites, sit back and think about what it is you own. Because these websites will ask you to start filling in forms, and when you get to the end of that particular process, you'll then be asked to sign a declaration. And if you haven't thought about what it is you're trying to insure, then it's possible when you sign the declaration you've missed something or you've got something wrong. So what you need to do basically is you need to work out what it is you're trying to insure and where and what type of risk you're insuring it against. So first thing to do is to work out the value of your equipment. And again, that sounds a bit daft, but I'm not being daft, I'm being actually quite serious, because when you insure stuff, you insure it either at a new for old value, in other words, they will go and buy the equivalent new for whatever it is was lost, or they insure it against a value based scenario. So for me, with lots of legacy kit, I can't get new for old, so really it's a value based. What does this stuff go for in the market space if I was going to have to go and buy it again? So you've got to work out what type of insurance. Now if you're a gigging musician, new for old is probably a really good deal for you, because if your stuff gets stolen, you want to be able to go to the insurance company, you want them to pay out quite quickly, and you want to basically go and buy the same again, or the updated version of whatever it happened to be. So in that scenario, new for old might be the way to go. Whereas a studio musician, someone like me that has a legacy collection, relies on the instrument at a replacement value. So if I've got an M1, how much is it going to go for me to go onto eBay and buy an M1 again? That's the kind of view that I'm looking for. So I end up with two values effectively. I end up with a value that says what would it cost me to buy it brand new, and what would it cost me to replace what I have? What's the value of what I have? And I obviously go for the second version, because a lot of the stuff that I own you can't buy brand new anymore, so it's pointless having a new for old policy, because you just can't buy it. So it's better to have it based on a value based. So that's the first thing. The second thing here is to be reasonable about the cost. Don't overvalue your stuff if you're going for a value base, because all the insurance company will do is they will employ a loss adjuster, and the loss adjuster will basically go through and value the equipment that you say you've lost, and that value will be the value. So if you turn around and say a keyboard is worth £3,000, and the loss adjuster says, yeah, on your bike, son, it's worth £1,000, you've got a big fight on your hands. Whereas if you go in and say it's worth £1,200, and the loss adjuster comes in and says, well, it's somewhere between £1,500 and £1,000, I'll go with the £1,200 valuation, you're more likely to get an easier settlement. So don't overvalue your equipment. If you own a Jupiter 8, for argument's sake, and think it's worth £25,000, think again, because the loss adjuster won't think that. So that's that one. The other thing to think about before you go onto the portals is to think about, where do you want your equipment insured? Do you want it where you live? Do you want it where you work? Do you want it be insured in your car or van, or in a storage location? For me personally, I have most of my equipment in storage, because I don't have the space here to store it. It's as simple as that. So I put my equipment into storage, and from a fire and theft perspective, it is actually cheaper for me to take the insurance with the storage unit provider than actually take personal insurance. So I don't have a great deal of equipment here. I have a couple of keyboards and a couple of drum machines at the moment. That's pretty much it. And the camera equipment that I'm using to record this stuff. But I don't really have too much here. Well, very little here. Everything else is pretty much in storage. And therefore it works out cheaper to take their insurance than it does to take my insurance, and therefore I can have a lower insurance on the equipment that is here. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. The second thing to think about is, do you want to be insured while you're in a gig location? Especially where you might come into contact with the public, and you're going to say, but if you're in a gig location, that's a bit daft. Yes, it is a bit daft, but I've said it that way for a specific reason, because you can go to a gig location and not have any contact with the public. But do you need to protect yourself from the public? I think is probably where we need to sort of think about this. This is where it starts to get really interesting. What types of cover do you need? And this can be quite a minefield, actually. But if you've done the thinking exercise, then actually it becomes far easier to work out what risks you're trying to insure. And therefore it should be easier to assess, and therefore easier to fill in the form on the website to get your quotation and ultimately your policy. So these are the type of insurance you might have that follow this in a sec. But I do want to just make one thing very, very clear here. Don't get fooled into the multi-insurances trap. Okay? What do I mean by the multi-insurances trap? Well, this is where you think your equipment is covered by multiple insurances, but actually, because it's covered by multiple insurances, it's covered by none. What do I mean by this statement? Well, there are two scenarios that really come to mind in this area. The first is you have multiple insurances with exclusions, e.g. gig insurance covers equipment while on the road but not at your home, and home insurance with a per item limit which your equipment exceeds. Therefore, neither of those two insurances will cover a theft from your house. Two insurances covering the same item, but at the point of claim neither insurance accepts the claim or accepts the liability. What do I mean by that? Well, insurance companies will take the view that you've insured it twice to try and commit fraud, and therefore both insurance companies will deny the claim, saying that the other one covers it. This is a really, really common situation, actually, more common than you think it is. You need to be very clear on what equipment you're insuring, with who, and for what reason. Let's start with the basics. Theft. Fairly straightforward. Your equipment has been stolen. That's the risk you're trying to cover. First thing is to ensure the location of the equipment might be stolen from is stated on your insurance policy. And you might think that's daft, but really that is probably one of the key things, to make sure that the location that you're saying it's been stolen from is actually covered by your policy. Be that home, place of work, if you travel, is it insured in the vehicle that you use? And remember, expensive items are not covered on standard motor insurance. So you might think that your motor insurance will cover you for, I don't know, theft of a laptop for argument's sake, but it might not cover theft of a keyboard, and it definitely won't cover theft of anything that's used in a commercial enterprise if you've got standard motor insurance. In the UK we have a form of motor insurance which is social, domestic and pleasure, and then we have a form of insurance called Class 1, and then we have a form of insurance which is a trader's policy. That's very, very simple. SD, social, domestic and pleasure, means you can drive to and from your work and you can use your car, take the family out at weekends. Class 1, or as it used to be called Class 1, it may have changed what it's called now, allows you to use your car in conjunction with your job. So that means that if you go from site to site, then if you get hit or your car gets damaged or whatever it happens to be while you're travelling from site to site on business, you're covered. And then the third type of policy in generic terms is this sort of, you're using your car to perform your job, as in you drive a van and deliver goods, for argument's sake. At that point, you're in a different, and each one of those, obviously, as you go up, you get more premium because the risk gets larger, if you like. So that's one example of that. Second, high value items are declared to the insurance company, so there can be no ambiguity. So if you do have a high-end computer system, you do have a high-end keyboard, you do have a very expensive drum kit or guitars or whatever it happens to be, they need to be declared to the insurance company. You need to tell the insurance company you have these things and you are going to be storing them or transporting them or something or other, okay? Because they will need to know. And if you don't tell them, then you can exceed the per diem limit, and therefore they won't pay out. Remember, insurance companies will look for every reason they can not to pay out, right? That's the important thing here. And thirdly, understand the basis of insurance that you've taken. Now that really does sound a daft one. Well, it's theft, isn't it? It's simple. Not necessarily. Are you going for new for old? In other terms, you want replacement, likewise replacements, to purchase those that were stolen. Are you just looking for a replacement value so you can go and source the instruments again? As I said, new for old tends to be more expensive than a value-based approach because of the nature of it's basically buying that thing at the current market value from a retailer. So just be careful on those sort of areas. Okay, let's talk about the other classic risk here, which is fire. Well, most policies do actually state fire and theft. They are actually separate risks and that can both result in a loss, but they result in a loss from a different risk being underwritten. They are separate, and you should check the small print on the policy. May state things like, for argument's sake, that equipment should be disconnected while not in use, therefore minimising the risk of a mains electrical fire from something being faulty in your equipment. Now, I've always done that personally. I mean, as soon as I walk out of when I had the studio up and running, when I left the studio, I made sure that everything was actually disconnected. Nothing was live in the studio while I wasn't there. Personal preference, but I always did it. Just means that there's nothing there to cause an electrical fire. And many studios actually have, I mean, quite a few of the ones that I've been in over the years, actually have a generic kill switch in the studio that effectively disconnects all the equipment from the mains, or all the plug sockets from the mains in the studio while the studio is not being used. So overnight, when no one's in there, basically everything is switched off. Typically things like computers might be on a separate circuit, but generally the consoles and the synths and the racks and all the other stuff is generally switched off. As I say, it's a minimise risk thing, but it's horses for courses. Another stipulation is the storage location should have fire detectors, and again, this is something that people completely misunderstand, which is, why do I need fire detectors when I'm storing equipment? And if I go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, and I made a statement about the fact that I insure all my equipment that's in storage with the storage provider, and there is a good reason why I actually do that, and that is that the storage provider provides 24/7 CCTV camera coverage of the site itself, and specifically the entrances and exits. And you have to go in through the entrance, and you have to log in to get onto site, and your vehicle registration plate is number checked as you go into the site by the CCTV. So all those good security things are there. The second point, so that sort of kind of covers theft, and the second point, and the reason why it's good, is because they have a fire detection system and a fire suppression system built into the building, which basically means if fire breaks out in the building, the internal system should theoretically put it out and alert people that there is a problem, so that the fire brigade can be called, etc., etc. And therefore, it minimises the risk. And the other side of it is all these systems are checked and verified and certified by people at least annually. So that provides the insurance companies with a good deal of comfort that the risk they are underwriting in terms of fire and theft is pretty minimal. I mean, it still can happen. Let's face it, things happen. But if the bottom line is that they've taken all those precautions to mitigate the risk, then the insurance gets cheaper, and that's the reason why the insurance is cheaper, taking it through the storage system. Anyway, I just thought I'd say that. This is always a good one and catches many people out. Transit insurance. If you're transporting your instruments from A to B, i.e. to a gig, might be a good idea to have some form of transit insurance in place that covers the instruments being stolen from the van. And the classic thing is you're driving to a gig and you stop off at a motorway service station to have your McDonald's, just to keep the energy levels up, come back and there's no van. So it's good to have some sort of transit insurance for that scenario. The second scenario is that the instruments are in the van and somebody hits the van, or the van has to take evasive actions, everything shifts around in the van, and your bright shiny keyboard has a great big crack in it where something has basically speared it. Or the third thing here is something being dropped while in movement. So you're moving it from the van into the venue, or you're moving out of the venue late at night. And that's actually, funny enough, one of the things I can turn around and say is moving stuff out of the venue late at night when you're tired is probably when most damage will occur, because you have the kind of effort attitude sometimes. You've done a gig, it's not gone particularly well, all you want to do is get out of the venue, and you're a little bit less particular than usual, and things get damaged. And what I can say to this is I can actually attest to the keyboard spearing incident, because I actually had that years ago, and it was before I had a policy of travelling around with my keyboards in hard cases. Now, if I move a keyboard now, all my keyboards are in hard cases of one description or another, but gives them a little bit more protection where something would slide across the van, for argument's sake, and spear. But I had that years ago. Padded bag, keyboard in padded bag. Can't remember what it was now. Might be in the bass amp, I think it was. Drive out to slam the brakes on. Bass amp shifted, speared the corner of my keyboard, and basically my keyboard wouldn't work again. I'm trying to think what keyboard that was, but I can remember looking at it and thinking that's not going to work tonight. It was the bottom line, the saving grace was it wasn't my primary keyboard. My primary keyboard was still operational, but these things do happen. Gig insurance. Now, there are lots of specific types of gig insurance, specifically around things like cancellation of gigs, refunds, all that sort of stuff. But I'm not going to talk specifically about those, because for most of us, they are not really applicable. The one I am going to talk about is something called public liability. And this is sold as protecting the public. Actually, really, the reality is it's protecting you from the public. Or from the public in proximity to you being injured, or in proximity to your equipment. And the simplest example is a member of the public tripping over a microphone cable, and I have seen that so many times in my time. That somebody has come up on stage or has come up to you, and the microphone cable is trailing across the floor because obviously the singer is moving around the stage with the microphone. He's got it on a stand, and they come up and just go straight over after tripping over the microphone cable. Normally a little bit inebriated, I might add. And in the UK, we're probably less litigious than other parts of the world. But you still, if they injure themselves by tripping over your microphone cable, it's possible they might decide they're going to sue you for their injuries and loss of earnings and distress. which seems to be the current one at the moment, which is, you go for, the distress of having my arm broken. Irrelevant the fact that you were blind, drunk, and making a complete fool of yourself when you came up and fell over the cable, but that's irrelevant. They fell over your cable and therefore you're liable. So, personally, I have to be honest and say I wouldn't go out on the road without public liability insurance. It's just personal preference. I don't carry public liability insurance per se, but I do get public liability insurance through the policy that I currently have. So it's not something I went out looking for when I was purchasing my insurance, but I get it as part of my insurance deal. But if you're a keyboard player, one of the things around public liability is the fact that you've got electrical equipment. This stuff is powered by mains voltage power, and typically you're going to have cables in the back of this, and you're going to have extension sockets, and you're going to have various other things. Now, the way my rig used to be built is I used to have effectively a cabinet that was on wheels, which would have all my rack mount synths and other stuff like that in it, and then at the back of that there would be a plug termination unit. So all my keyboards went back to this plug termination unit, and then I would have one or two cables which I would then be gaffer taped to the stage back to a central power point. So I didn't have myriads of cables running anywhere else around the keyboard rig. But other people, they have extension leads running everywhere. I can remember, when I was younger, they would all, there'd be one extension lead that went off to a main socket somewhere, and then the guitarist and the rhythm guitarist and the bassist and and the PA would all be coming off this sort of one extension lead. And that extension lead can get hot and people can trip over it. And I think back to what we used to do, and I think, would I do it now? No, I wouldn't. But I know better now. That's probably where we're coming. Now, this is a really interesting one, and probably something a lot of you don't think about, and that's loss of earnings. And you're going, why do I need loss of earnings? Well, it can be a lifesaver, loss of earnings. If you're injured and therefore can't earn money playing your instrument, and if that's how you earn your money, then this insurance can pay a proportion or all of your projected earnings while you're incapacitated. And you're going to say, well, the rubbery road. I can tell you now that I know somebody that, due to COVID, was unable to earn, was unable to work. And they looked at their loss of earnings cover on their insurance policy and found out that their wording of their policy allowed them to claim for COVID-related cancellations. So basically, where venues were cancelling her because and they stated that it was a COVID issue, she was able to actually get to claim the loss of earnings from her loss of earnings insurance policy. She was lucky because most insurance policies wrote out COVID either very quickly or had exclusion clauses for pandemic-related issues. But she had taken out the insurance, it was there, and she was able to claim. So, don't ignore loss of earnings. It can be a lifesaver. I'm particularly thinking of things like, you break your arm, therefore you can't pay your keys. And I'm going to come on to a sort of combined insurance type, and that's called studio insurance. And it basically is a combination of various different types of risk, all sort of bundled together. And this is pretty typical of how the insurance will be sold to you. And I've gone over the risks and what the risks are, but then you start to look at some sort of combined insurance policy. And it will typically cover theft, fire, public liability. And I held this, even though the studio was just manned by me. It was my little place to go and play and discover and record and see whatever came of it. But I still held all those particular covers. And although I didn't need some of the cover, it was there. So there were some really interesting things in this particular insurance policy. One was loss of master. And you turn around and say, why would I need loss of master? Well, I didn't, is the reality. But it was there as an option. And effectively what it was saying is, if you were recording for a client and you managed to lose the master tape, is how it was described, they would pay for the cost of re-recording the material. There were stipulations about what defined loss. Now I know everybody's going to shout at the screen and say, well, we don't use master tape anymore, we use computers. How often do you back it up? What happens if that hard drive were to go, or your backup drive was to go, or your cloud account got compromised? These are all things to think about. The other one, which I thought was really interesting, was equipment damage through power. And again, this was a really interesting one, and it was all related to if the power systems damaged your equipment beyond repair, then you could claim on the insurance for electrical damage. And I did think this was a really, really interesting one. Personally, I had everything in the studio on UPSs, and stuff that didn't need to be on a UPS was on a power conditioner of some description. And that's the way I sort of mitigated the risk. But believe you me, I have seen what a power spike can do, or a brownout can do. So a power spike is where in the UK we have 240 volts, 230, 240 volts, and effectively it's a sine wave, so it goes positive 240, negative 240, and at some point it goes through zero. What a power spike is where that signal is not clean. It's not a clean sine wave doing that. It sort of does that, or does that, whichever way it's going, plus or minus. And therefore you can end up with more power, more voltage, should I say. That's the wrong thing to say, power. More voltage than your equipment is designed for, and therefore if the equipment is not correctly protected, you can effectively cause damage to the internal circuitry. And I've seen that. I've seen other people who've had that, especially in venues where years ago the electrics in venues, shall we say, wasn't particularly clean, and you had all kinds of things operating off the electrical circuit. And I'm thinking, in this particular case, there was a voltage spike every time somebody put the dishwasher on behind the bar. Is the one I'm thinking of anyway. So that's one scenario. I've had another scenario where I had an amplifier that decided that rather than, and again, our amplifiers work on an alternating current. It's how the cone moves in and out, based on the waveform that's being pushed to the speaker. But I had a scenario where the amplifier went DC. Effectively, instead of an AC current going and the cone moving out, a permanent DC current was pushed through the system, and the cones were sent right to the end of their travel and therefore burnt, and the coils will then burn out. That took out all the speakers, both the amplifier and the speakers in that scenario were completely kiboshed. But I've seen that. So there are various areas where this might happen, and if you haven't got your key bits of equipment smoothed by a UPS or a power conditioner, it's something you really should think about. The bottom line is really, is it a risk to carry no insurance? And what I would say to anybody who watches this video and gets this far through it is, at a basic minimum, you should be carrying some sort of musician specific fire and theft policy for the equipment that you own. But at the end of the day, you've got to consider this. It's your money, your hard-earned cash that you invested into this stuff, and you have to weigh up the risk of taking the insurance and having no equipment, especially if you're a giggy musician, because that will stop you earning money. And on that note, I'm going to say live long and prosper. Bye bye.